All right, Chris Speaks here tonight with Bob Brooks, going to the first episode of a Korean War podcast, often called the Forgotten War, that many Americans know little about, and unfortunately, like I says, Forgotten War. Talk a little about it, and shame to say that I really don't know about it. So Bob's a expert, so to speak, on the war, or at least very knowledgeable on it, and he's agreed to come on and kind of give us a history of it. And thank him for that. Bob, how are you doing tonight, man? And thanks for coming on.
I'm doing real good. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
So before we get started, there were a couple of things I'd like to mention
Sure,
to
absolutely.
anybody that sees this video. I would ask them to go to change.org.
Change.org.
Yeah, and look up "Fix the Name,
Okay.
Errors, and Omissions" on the Korean War Veterans Memorial Wall of Remembrance. They uh they got about $20 million to build a memorial to the Korean War veterans that died, and there's a lot of errors on that board, and they need to be fixed. And there's some difficulty in getting that done. So we've got a petition. We're trying to get 15,000 names. I think
Now,
currently we're at 12,209.
when you say, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Bob. When you say errors, are you talking about like misspelled names or? Uh,
Well, there's misspelled names. There's names that never made it to the wall that should have been there.
mhm.
And there's a couple names that are on there of people who did not die in the war.
Really?
Yeah, there are thousands of errors on this wall.
Wow, that's awful that they went through that kind of to put that structure together and then have that type of errors. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
No, you're
uh,
fine.
your saying, but yeah, please tell us more about it.
Well, I'd like for everybody to go and at least sign a petition so we can get the government to act to get this thing fixed. It's the government's errors that created it, and I think it's only fair that it be the government that fixes it. There's a couple of guys that run a page called the Korean War. Go to koreanwar.org. It's the Korean War Project. It's ran by the Barker brothers. They're a 501c3. They survive strictly on donations. And they've been going at this for about 30 years trying to get these names right. Anybody that does any
So
research on the Korean War, this would be the first web page they'd go to.
sorry, 30 years they've been trying to get this straightened out.
Yeah, 30 years they've been working on getting the names right. Absolutely. Even published a book to that effect. But it was turned down by the government. The government decided that they're just going to go with what the original files say. But now we're falling back on military intelligence. Not always the best of things. So anyway, I've just asked your members or anybody who follows this page to please sign the petition and take a look at the Korean War project. And if you feel so inclined, donations are extremely welcome. If the lights ever go out on that page, the lights will stay out. And it is a wealth of deep dive information there: maps, charts, locations, times, everybody that was involved, whatever branch, whatever regiment, battalion, all of that's listed in there. And a lot of the documents, commands coming down the pipe to the soldiers and whatnot, that stuff's in there too. It's an amazing site, and it'd be a national disaster to lose it. That's my opinion. I've used it several times, and these guys are really top notch. They know what they're doing.
Now, for sorry, you actually admin a Facebook page too on the Korean War, correct?
Yeah, I run a Facebook page called the Korean War's Chosen Reservoir.
Okay,
We started it in 2016. We're somewhere in the area of just over 4,000 members at this point.
great.
The point of it originally in 2016 was to highlight the Chosen Reservoir battle, which was one of the major battles of the Korean War. But we've soon realized that that's not enough. We have people coming to the page that had, cousins and uncles and fathers, and they want to know more about, their family members. So we learned real quick we can't just isolate it to be about the chosen reservoir. So it's everything involved with the Korean War. So if you got a question you want
So,
to find out, come to us.
so my first question to you is before I get into what we're going to lay out, for our first night, for our first episode. Tonight's going to be about, the build up of war. Tell me what got Bob Brooks interested in the Korean War.
Well, I've always been a student of history, and
Mm-hmm.
when the kids were all grown up and they got out of the house, I decided, I guess it's been about 15 years, somewhere in that ball game, that I would put together my own study guide.
Right.
And I wanted to start with the US Constitution, right? And study US history from the beginning. And I would put certain landmarks in my studies where I could take a break, take a little vacation. So I started with American founding, Jamestown and whatnot, been to Colonial Williamsburg, so on and so forth. But you learn real quick once you start that way from the beginning, instead of starting from the now and going backwards, you start from the beginning and going forwards, more things make sense. And one of the things that stands out, first of all, is that you can't study US history without studying US military history. These two things
No,
must go hand in hand.
you're 100% correct on that. I mean, I think that's one of the things that you know. I'm a student of military history too, but that's exactly right. That's what got me. Was one of the things that had me interested in history in school was we was fighting one war after the next.
Right,
Whether it was a proxy war or full engagement. But sorry, I
right.
didn't mean to. I was. Um,
No, you're fine. You're fine. So let's took the founding fathers, read Thomas Paine and Jefferson and Washington and whatnot, and I decided I would use major wars as a time stop to take a break, go back, study the U.S. history, then study the war that followed that history, and just kept going on and on. So each one was a landmark. So the American Revolution, took a break. The War of 1812, studied up to that, studied the war, took a break, got into the Civil War, and the Civil War was rather impressive in terms of its overall size and events. So I decided to break that in half. So that break happened at Gettysburg, the Gettysburg Battle. Studied up to Gettysburg, studied the battlefields, took a vacation, went to the battlefields, right? Checked them out, Yorktown, whatnot. And it was about that time that a friend of mine that I'd known for years, I discovered that he was part of the chosen few. So I'm like, I know this term, but I don't know what it means specifically, right? So I looked up chosen few and I realized it's the major battle with the United States Marine Corps. They're in 40 below weather, fighting the Chinese, so on and so forth. So I go back to this guy. And I was like, dude, I've been studying up on this. I said, that's quite a story of yours to be able to tell. And I found out he's not a Marine, he's Army. And not only that, he's a 17-year-old platoon sergeant at this battle. Now,
wow.
for the Army at that battle, that's 2,500 Army guys with about, I don't know, 5, 6, 700 Katusas. And of them, only 369 U.S. Army soldiers walked out of that battle. He was one of those.
Wow.
That's how tough that battle was. So for
So
years,
that
go ahead.
particular battle was what really got your attention or piqued your interest in it.
Yeah, it did. It got my attention. And I told him, I said, you've got quite the story to tell. Somebody needs to tell it. And he told me for
Mm-hmm.
years, well, come on over to the shop. Let's have a cup of coffee. We'll talk about this. And I knew what he was trying to get me to do, but I harassed him for 10 years and said, look, somebody needs to write it. And finally, in 2014, I decided, what the hell? It's a cup of coffee. What can I lose, right? We go in, we have a little discussion. The next thing you know, I'm walking out and I'm going to be the one that writes his biography.
So you wrote a book on this man's biography of the Korean War.
Yeah,
or
his whole life,
so
but he covered.
you're a published author.
Yes, the title of the book is
Congratulations.
From the Frozen Chosen to Churchill, as told to Bob Brooks. It's the story of Command Sergeant Major Ray Cottrell.
Congratulations. That's very admirable. I mean, because so more often than not that um, we have history books, and they'll tell about the war or something, or they'll tell about you'll hear about our Eisenhower, or General Lee or General Grant, and sometimes you never hear the guys you never hear about. Those are the stories that people really need to be told about. I mean, not taking anything away from those other generals, but
Right.
the guys that we never hear about.
There's plenty of authors about major generals. I think Patton probably has 4 or 5 authors writing his story down. Nobody's talking about the guys in the mud, which is another thing that held my attention. And I thought to myself, if I publish this book, it should be nice to have like a DVD to go along with it, so you can actually meet this soldier I'm talking about, right? And that's where YouTube came along. So I started a YouTube page, and the interviews that I had with these soldiers goes onto that YouTube page. So in Ray's case, you get to read the book, but you get to meet the man as well. You can hear him talk. He tell you his story. Of course, if you listen to the interviews, it's really broken apart in terms of chronology. So I had to not only put his stories in chronological order, but for me, non-military, I had to learn a lot of stuff about the military I've never known before. Command structure.
Did you serve in the military?
Say again?
Did you serve in the military?
No.
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. All right. I got you.
Yeah. So here I am learning about the military to a command sergeant major, which is basically the equivalent of an NCO general, right?
Yeah. You pretty much summed it up right there. Command sergeant major is untouchable. You reach that rank of command sergeant major. Uh, Generals don't say anything to command sergeant majors.
Not so much, no.
Yeah, I mean,
Because they do what generals do, except they do it outside, not in the office.
I was trying to explain to somebody one time I was in there and about a lieutenant, and command sergeant major was dogging this lieutenant out, cussing him like he was a dog.
Right.
He's like, but he's an officer. I said, yeah, but he's a command sergeant major. He's like, but he outranks him. I was like, yeah, but he's the command sergeant major, and he was the post command sergeant major too. I said, and he said, but he's still. I said, he works for the brigadier general. That is his right hand man, and he is the post command sergeant major. I can't explain it to you other than he's the command sergeant major.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is how.
Could have worked for a major general, right?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, in 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 a military situation, like in say it was formation, that we were going, we were going out and a convoy. Can't even think there. The command sergeant major and the commanding officer are going to be separate.
Yeah.
They are not going to have both them, get killed at the same time. They are going to be in separate vehicles away from each other.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm sorry. Didn't.
No, you're fine. That was one of the lessons I had to learn along the way. In fact, there's an event in his life where he's just outside of his commanding officer's office. He's got his desk outside in the room next door, and this lieutenant comes up, grabs the phone off his desk, and starts making a phone call. Well, Ray gets a little rattled at that because he's dressing down this soldier, and here comes this officer picking up his phone and basically interrupting Ray doing his job. So what does Ray do? He picks up the phone, he throws it out the window. while the officer is still attached to it. So the officer
didn't say anything to him. I mean,
well, the officer turned on him and said, "What the hell are you doing?" And the commanding officer, whose door was wide open, heard this ruckus and called this lieutenant in and just ripped him a new one, basically saying what you were saying. Hey, that's my sergeant major. That's my first sergeant. He does what I tell him to do. You stay away from him. And you would think, when you look at these sleeves and you see all these hash marks going down both sleeves,
Yes.
that you're gonna go, wait a minute, I should chill my wheels. But they don't, they're stupid.
Whatever, it's when you become a command sergeant major, whether it's a battalion or whatever. When you see this guy, and he's usually walking with a full bird or brigadier general, and that's who he's walking with. He's talking. You should realize this guy's probably gonna get whatever. I'm not gonna beat him.
No, you're not gonna win this battle. You
Yeah.
might win the fight, you're not gonna win the war.
Um. So well that's great. I'm sorry. Was something else before I got into questions about the book?
No, no, we're good. If anybody wants to look it up, it's available on Ex Libris. It's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble if they're interested. Uh, I told Ray, I said, I can't guarantee you the quality of the book. What I can guarantee is that you're going to have one hell of a family heirloom to pass on. And that was my motivation because I knew the family and knew all his kids and grandchildren. And I wanted them to have something to remember him by. I mean, he was such a remarkable man and a pillar of his community. And I just thought this was something worthy of note.
Okay. So here we are. It's let's go say late summer of 1945. Germany surrendered. Japan surrendered.
Yeah.
What what takes place that leads us to Korea?
Well, you can
How
thank the
in
Kim. You can thank the Kim family. Uh, Kim had studied in Russia, and he was involved in a lot of guerrilla warfare in the Korean Peninsula.
Okay.
And at one point, he gets the bright idea that he's going to get Russian and Chinese support, and he's going to try to unify the country. And of course, the country
What
gets
time?
split in half.
What what
Mhm.
what, what year does this start or time frame?
Yeah, this is 45, 46. I mean, it's right at the start, the end of World War II. There was a settlement made between the Russians and the Allies that they would separate Korea into two parts, and they kind of accidentally came across the 38th parallel of the line of demarcation for the North and the South.
Hey, sorry, I got one question for you. Who actually forced the Japanese out of Korea? I mean, when they surrendered, did they just take all their troops surrendered and left, or
Well, they
how did
both did. Both the Russians and the Americans did. The Americans were
uh,
fairly quick about repatriating the Japanese that were there. There were some Japanese that had ties so deep, going back to the early 1900s, that stayed there. And the Russians, well, they were a little bit harsher. Let's put it that way. Uh,
yeah, I believe that.
some of those guys didn't get back for a couple of years if they got back at all. I mean, the Russians were pretty staunch and pretty hardcore. But you have to understand too that the Russians that were occupying North Korea wasn't the cream of the crop coming out of the Russian military. And most of the cream of the crop had suffered, died, or moved on. So they were enlisting people uh, less patriotic motivations. Let's put it that way.
So when did we? Actually, I asked you about us getting the Japanese out of there. When did we first have boots on the ground in South Korea?
That would be in July of 1950. The war actually starts. They come across the line June 25th, 1950.
Okay.
Right?
So up until that time, we didn't but the, so but the Japanese but we got the rest of the Japanese forces out of the South when they surrendered, right?
Yeah.
Or but we didn't keep any kind of forces, advisors or anything there. We just left and went back.
Right. So at the UN Security Council, the American representative gets up there and he's talking about the umbrella of influence that the Allies have, right? And
Uh-huh.
he mentions Japan, needless to say, Okinawa, Formosa, which is Taiwan, and he doesn't mention Korea. Well, that's where Kim got the idea. It's like, hey, maybe the Americans aren't going to do anything if we try to unify the country. So he goes to Stalin and he goes to Mao and generates a bunch of motivation on their end. Mao was on board with the idea. So they load up on the 38th parallel, and then about 4 o'clock in the morning on June 25th, they come roaring across. The problem in South Korea was when the Allies had basically returned the country back to them, which was kind of the American way. We'll go in, we'll clean it up, but we don't hold it. Japan was a little bit of a different story, but they left in forces on the South Korean side what they called a constabulary force, which is basically a little beefier than a police force. But they didn't have any anti-tank guns. They didn't have tanks. I don't even think they had bazookas. I could be wrong about that. I may have to go double check on that. But
Is this in 1950 or did they start?
this is 1950. This is
Okay.
June 25th, 1950.
Okay. All right. Okay. So hold on before we get there. I want you to leave me before we start the war. What So this was the part of the um Truman was it the Truman Doctrine about stopping the spread of communism? Or, or
Yeah, the whole thing was motivated by the communist expansionism
okay.
under Truman.
So and so they was about on 38th parallel. So did we have Russian troops and Chinese troops in North Korea like in 46 and 47?
Yeah, you had Russian troops in 45, 46, 47. You can look at Konan, which
If
is
well,
Hagaru in
if we
North Korea.
if we didn't have U.S. forces didn't have boots on the ground then, why didn't the Russians and Chinese just go take it?
Well, essentially, I think Mao looked at it as it would be a buffer zone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if he could get the whole country, so be it. And if he didn't, well, at least he still has North Korea and he's got a buffer zone, right? And Stalin, for what it's worth, mixed opinions about him about this whole thing anyway. It's like he wanted to support, like he sent the T-38s and all that to him,
Right.
right? But he kind of wanted to be lower profile because I think he was still negotiating other sectors of Europe at the time. I don't know that Korea was a higher priority, right?
Do you think that they were hesitant because of U.S. nuclear capabilities?
One more time, please.
Do you think that maybe they held off is because they may have been worried about U.S. nuclear capabilities?
Absolutely. And in 1949, Russia had just got their first nuclear warhead, right? And capturing North Korea and holding North Korea, the Russians holding North Korea, I think had a lot to do with their research on nuclear capabilities. A lot of the Japanese, not, I don't know if I've been saying a lot, but there were Japanese scientists that were held by the Russians and put to work on their nuclear proliferation. That's a pretty known fact.
Um, so during these years, you're talking about what's going on in Europe and jockeying for position. Um, what kind of um, not brinksmanship, statesmanship like stuff was going on with two sides jockeying for position and like trying to get support for, like say, was the U.S. trying to get support from Britain? Hey, if we have to go to war here, you coming with us? And Stalin making sure he had troops from the Warsaw Pact, or Were they trying to work out, let's have a peace here? Was there any, negotiations like this taking place?
Well, the UN got involved rather quickly. 22 countries signed on board. Russia going against the idea about sending troops to South Korea to fight off the North Korean invasion.
Mm-hmm.
22 countries get involved. Not all of them sent military. Some of them have just sent medical supplies. So, from a soldier's point of view, the list isn't that long, but in terms of financial or hospital care, that kind of thing, the list gets longer. But 22 countries are involved, from Ethiopia to Great Britain to Australia, the Buccaneers in Puerto Rico, the 65th Infantry, they get involved. It's a pretty good list. So the UN actually was acting like you would expect the UN to do at that time.
So was Stalin the 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 driving force, or the one pushing it? Was he the one that wanted to go to war?
No, I think it was Mao. I think Mao had more to say about it than Stalin. Again, he's looking for that buffer zone to keep his country intact. He had concerns that, well, if they unified South Korea, the unified Korea via a democratic side from coming up from South Korea, what's to stop them to try to push into Manchuria, get into China?
So the Mao, or did they start thinking about this war immediately, or did it just that we're going to war with them, or was it
No,
something?
they didn't think there was going to be a war at all. They believed Kim was going to run down there with all these tanks and infantrymen and run over a country that had very little military support to prevent it. The South Koreans had gone to the U.S. several times and tried to get military support, tanks, bazookas, so on and so forth, and it was denied. So I'm sure Kim heard about that, and it just made him feel even more comfortable about going in and trying to unify the country under communism.
So when did these three, or I'll say or they're together, whatever. When did they make the decision? Okay, we're going to war.
Well, the Chinese comment about it is we're not going to go to war to support the North Koreans unless they cross the 38th parallel. When Sigmund Reed takes his forces, his rocks, ROKs, he takes them across the 38th, and then 2 weeks later, the UN Security Council approves it, and so MacArthur follows suit. And they about pushed them all the way back in the North Koreans all the way back into China. But at that point, Mao had already started amassing his soldiers and got them up on the Yalu River, the
Uh,
northern border of Korea.
I don't want to go too far into the war part because I and get lost on it. Um,
Okay.
so so they decided in January, or what, June of 50, he launches his attack.
In June of 50, Kim launches his attack.
Okay, all right. So I got one question, because I don't for this, because I don't want to get save it out for our war. How long did it take U.S. forces to get boots on the ground, and how was the South Koreans able to hold them off long enough for the U.S. to get there?
Oh, that's the story. All
Okay,
right.
well,
Task Force,
let's
go
say
ahead.
that.
Just about a week, less
Okay,
than a week.
all right.
Um,
So we've got the, the Allies. Um, did North Korea, besides China and Russia, did they have any of the other Warsaw Pact nations supporting them?
Not that I'm aware of. Most of my readings suggest that it's strictly Russia and China involved.
Okay, so here's a question I have for you, because War of 1812 referred to it as this too. Why is the Korean War, where we lost 50,000 people or so in 3 years, which is a lot of casualties, A lot of casualties.
Now we're 37,000 killed.
There was 37,000 killed. Okay.
Yeah.
So somehow I thought it was more than that, but
Now
that
wounded, adding wounded, that's a different story. Yeah, it's much higher.
okay. All right. So I got okay. So there was 57,000 casualties, just 37,000 killed. I mean, okay, that's still a tremendous amount. Um, why is this war often forgotten? Is it because it was so close after World War II, or was it because it was between World War II and Vietnam, or uh, or it wasn't as sexy as World War II?
Well, and if you look at it from a political point of view, you can make the argument that Truman wanted to be seen as the guy that ended World War II and didn't want to be seen as the guy that started World War III.
Wow.
At the same time, he didn't want to see communist expansionism that Stalin had shown quite readily, right after the war. And Stalin was all about land acquisition, right? And Stalin's argument was, hey, these are war reparations, man. This is all I'm doing. We deserve this, right? Uh, they even supported the North Koreans with airplanes, pilot training, and it's said that some Russian pilots actually got their feet wet for the first time in war by flying in North Korean battles. But we'll go into that at a different time. From the American citizen's point of view, you have all these soldiers coming home from World War II, right? And I fall back on the old statement that a farmer wants to farm and a fisherman wants to fish, and anything beyond that is something they'd rather not have to deal with unless they absolutely have to, right? So these soldiers are coming home from the military is being downsized. There's an expectation of peace. New housing going up all over the place, so these soldiers have a place to live. And
Yeah, people are making money. I mean, we're booming. I mean,
right. Well, we're still coming through a depression for what it's worth, because a lot
right.
of the kids that are signing up, they're underage. It's either live on the street or join the military. As we spoke earlier about Ray Cottrell, this is a 17-year-old platoon sergeant in 1950, which means he had to be in the military at age 16.
Let me ask you this, because I know in the communist countries it don't matter, but um, this doctrine of stop the spread of communism and going to war. Excuse me. How does the American people feel about this? Are they supportive of this, or are they
Well,
reluctant to get drug into a war with this? I mean,
I,
what's
the overwhelming majority, in my opinion, is like, hey, man, it's not my war. I don't know. I don't even know where Korea is. Most people didn't even know where Korea is. And it
okay?
was kind of billed as a police action, right? It's never
Right.
really called a war. We call it a war, you know.
Yeah. And uh, the the when I was in Iraq, I mean Afghanistan, that's what's called as police action, and um, I hate when um, people who I hear on the talking heads on TV and talk about a police action, and I'm like, look, police officers are not military personnel, and they're not trained to be soldiers.
Right,
Soldiers are not trained to be police officers.
right.
I was not a police officer. I'm not a law enforcement officer. So no, this is war. You can call it whatever you want to, but a police action. No, we're not police officers.
Right.
And sorry, I don't want you to think I meant that negative towards your comment, but I've heard people say that this Vietnam was a police action, Korea was no, those were wars.
There were wars.
Um,
Absolutely.
so I think you gave us, I mean, a good build up of what led to this tonight. So I think it's a good stopping point. I'll talk to you after we cut. Is there anything else we should know about that? Finally triggered this. Um,
I think the triggering, if you get down to nuts and bolts about it, uh, unification of the country. The South wanted to unify because they had family members across the 38 in the North. Family members in the North had family in the South. So when you get down to the citizenry level, I think there was a high motivation for unification. but it's the powers that be. You get the squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of thing, and that would be Ken, and he gets all this support. He'd been running guerrilla warfare through Korea all the way after World War II up to the start of the Korean War, right? He just happened to be the wrong man in the right place at the right time, and that kind of takes us to where we are today with Korea. You know,
Bob, it's I mean, this is a great first start, man. I look forward to many more. This. I hope the listeners enjoy it. I think it's going to be a really good thing that we can get some information out to people. That will really know what happened then and appreciate the sacrifice that the American slave. Um, Thanks for doing this, man, and we'll talk soon.
all right, sir. Appreciate it. Look to hear from you soon.